later on today. We asked to speak to a Conservative representative from the government, but no one was available. We're going to talk now to Sir Nicholas Soames, independent MP, former Conservative MP. He's a long-standing friend of the Prime Minister, but can no longer sit as a Conservative after he voted against the government to try to stop a no-deal Brexit taking place on October the 31st. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Victoria.
I want to ask you about Brexit, first of all. As you know, the Prime Minister has repeatedly said he will obey this new anti-no-deal law, which you voted for, but it also keeps repeating that the UK will leave the EU on October the 31st. How confident are you that Parliament will succeed in ensuring he abides by that law?
Well, we believe that the Ben bill is watertight. So quite how this proposes to happen is a mystery. And the Prime Minister keeps saying it's going to happen, and I listened to the Chancellor this morning, as I know you did, and we both observed the same thing, that he didn't actually quite know how it was going to happen. So it is a mystery yet to be revealed. But I do believe, although I believe the country is absolutely fed up to the back teeth with Brexit and just devoutly longs for it to be done and to get on with the agenda that the Prime Minister is putting forward, we have got to get over this very, very detailed and important hump, and we have to get a deal done. And I do believe that there is a deal to be done, but whether or not it's a doable deal is altogether another thing. So we took the view, the 21 of us, that the only way to make sure that this happened, because we believe the economic consequences would be very serious for this country, was to try to secure in the Ben legislation, in the Ben bill, the protection we feel the country needs.
If Boris Johnson did manage to get around the law, and Sir John Major identified a potential way, Foreign Secretary in an interview in one of the Sunday newspapers potentially identified another way, what would be the implications if he gets round it?
Well, they're very serious, and I commend all the Supreme Court judgment the other day that be you ne'er so high, the law is yet above you. And the Prime Minister and the government must obey the law. And Parliament will make sure that they do obey the law. And that's what Parliament is for. And we will make sure it happens.
How?
By being in Parliament.
OK. What about reports that the Remain coalition, who are meeting today, leaders of various opposition parties, might talk about changing the law to compel the Prime Minister to ask for an extension a lot earlier? Have you heard talk of that?
No. And I mean, the answer is that I've heard talk of almost absolutely everything, including pigs flying. But they're all gong and no dinner. And so far, we haven't seen anything. So we need to see, and the Prime Minister, in my view, needs to make plain, which I hope he will do, the basis, the kind of outline of the basis of the deal, the timescale, and allow Parliament to make its judgment. And
you still think if he did get a deal, there's time to get it through and sorted and voted on before October the 31st?
There's not time to do any of those things, but it will be done. It will be done. And if there's a deal, and it's a reasonable deal, we will support it. I mean, our quarrel with Boris Johnson is not over anything else, essentially, other than no deal.
Do you want to be welcomed back in the Conservative Party? Do you want the whip restored, as it's known?
Well, look, I'm leaving after 37 years. And to be absolutely frank, I'm disappointed at the least and very angry at the most that I should have had the whip taken away from me. I voted against the government 3 times in 37 years, and those were all on defence issues. And I think it was a gross overreaction. So to be absolutely candid, I really don't mind. But there are other colleagues who mind very much that the whip should be returned to them. And I hope that it will be. And I think any sensible Prime Minister would look around and look at that group, Ken Clarke, Philip Hammond, Rory Stewart, Richard Benyon, some of the real heroes of our party, suspended. I think that's absolutely insane.
But for you, if they said, come back, Sir Nicholas Soames, would you say, no, it's fine?
No, well, I think I'd think about it, frankly.
Right. If an opposition party tables a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, which the Prime Minister was begging them to do last week, because it will lead to an election, would you vote with the government to bring it down, which Mr Johnson wants?
There are no circumstances that I can see that I would vote in a vote of no confidence against the Prime Minister.
Right.
And I think it would be folly. I can't see no question to which the answer is Jeremy Corbyn. And I would not vote to have a vote of no confidence and risk bringing the government down in that way.
Right. But if Mr Johnson wants you to, I mean, how would you feel about potentially voting to do that?
To bring the government down?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't allow it to happen. I will not vote in a motion of no confidence against my government.
Clearly, as you said, you don't want Jeremy Corbyn in there. Would there be some other figure? People have talked about Dame Margaret Beckett. No,
I really think all this talk about governments of national union and all that, it's a very fine idea. I think essentially you need to be in an even worse place than we are now before we get, and we need to get on with getting this done and over the line one way or the other.
How much do you think your party's changed since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister?
Well, I think it's become, with respect to Theresa May, I think it's become a great deal more energetic and purposeful. And I admire very much the Prime Minister's energy in trying to get this, which I think he will talk about today, onto the, as Norman Smith said, onto, looking a bit beyond Brexit. And there are great opportunities for our country. I take the view that it's really historically a bad decision to leave the European Union. But if the people voted to leave, and we must honour that. And the way to do it is to do it, as we said in the last manifesto, in a smooth and orderly way in order to cause as little disruption as we can to the economic life of this country.
I want to ask you about the allegations around the Prime Minister and Jennifer Arcuri and the allegations made by the journalist Charlotte Edwards, both of which the Prime Minister has denied or said everything was done properly. How much do they matter, do you think?
Well, as to the first one, I believe that's being investigated by the authorities, and no doubt if the Prime Minister had any interest to declare, he would have declared it. As to the second one, it would be in the Prime Minister's interest, in my view, to resolve this. This is a senior journalist, and it would be important, in my view, for the Prime Minister to sort this out and to try to resolve it. I mean, I don't think it's helpful to the Prime Minister or to the debate, and to be frank, although it's very serious, and I'm not attempting to mitigate it in any way, we have very big stuff to deal with, and although it's serious, it is but a sideshow to the bigger issues.
When you say resolve it, I mean, he said it wasn't true. Do you
well, if the Prime Minister says it wasn't true, I think it's a difficult question. The Prime Minister says it wasn't true, and Charlotte Edwards, who's I don't know her at all, but she's a senior and distinguished journalist, says it is true, and there it must hang in midair.
I'm going to ask you who you believe.
I believe the Prime Minister, and I believe Charlotte Edwards.
OK.
How's that for sitting on the fence?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But do you think Boris Johnson has got a woman issue?
I don't know. I really don't know.
You've known him for years. You describe him as a friend.
He is my friend. And it grieves me that I should be in breach with him and in breach of my party as a result of it. But I think, it's rather like President Trump. I mean, in a way, the President Trump's behaviour is sort of priced into the character already. And I don't know how serious this will affect the Prime Minister. But I think that he feels that he needs to get on and get this job done and not be sidetracked. But it's up, he must sort it out, obviously.
A couple more questions, if I may. Boris Johnson's sister Rachel and the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, have suggested that speculators are set to make a lot of money from a no-deal Brexit, and that could partly explain Mr Johnson's determination to leave on October the 31st if he has no deal. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm sure there are speculators who've betted in one way or another against the market or pro the deal or against the deal. In fact, I saw in Patrick Forbes' excellent documentary, Crispin Odey, talking about that, but there's absolutely nothing to do with the Prime Minister's behaviour, and I think any suggestion that that would be the case is just absolutely absurd.
What do you think of this unnamed cabinet minister telling the Times at the weekend that if Brexit isn't delivered on time, there could be a violent popular uprising, i.e. riots?
Well, I think it's a very stupid thing to say, and I've no doubt that there could be some public demonstrations of one sort or another. The country's divided, Parliament's divided. This is the most important issue this country has faced since the war. No doubt strong feelings will be expressed, but this is a country renowned for its pragmatism, its good sense and its sense of proportion. But it is true that, as we saw in Parliament the other day, it is true everyone needs to take a bit of a deep breath and calm down a little bit.
I want to play you an extract from a speech you made in the Commons after you were expelled from the Conservative Party. Here's a little bit of it.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not standing at the next election, and I am thus approaching the end of 37 years' service to this House, of which I have been proud and honoured beyond words to be a member. I'm truly very sad that it should end in this way, and it is my most fervent hope that this House will rediscover the spirit of compromise, humility and understanding that will enable us finally to push ahead with the vital work in the interests of the whole country that has inevitably had to be so sadly neglected whilst we have devoted so much time to wrestling with Brexit.
Actually, you watching yourself there, it's making you tearful.
Well, it was a bad moment, you know. And I do wish we could re-find it. And I also wish that people would understand that, you know, I lived through the miners' strike, as did in the House of Commons. And the House of Commons is the cockpit of the nation. And it gets rough. And I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that Parliament should not be restrained in the way it debates. But the Prime Minister, I think with hindsight, will agree that in respect of his remark to Paula Sherriff, who is a woman who has received the most disgusting and appalling abuse, as have Jess Phillips and a lot of other Labour women and Conservative women, I think it's lacking in sympathy and understanding to answer it in those words. But I would say in his mitigation, he'd been 25 hours without any sleep. He'd done 3.5 hours standing up in a very, very rowdy house. And I think he forgot himself. But to pretend that to answer the question of Paula Sherriff with the word humbug was a suitable conclusion is completely wrong. And it was a bad moment. But equally, the Prime Minister is right to say, you know, we mustn't be too squeamish about this. I mean, public debate in the pub is pretty rough. Well, it's rougher in the House. And
well, it's whether you think the House of Commons and the Prime Minister should lead the nation, for example.
I think the Prime Minister should be careful in his choice of words. But, you know, equally, I don't think the word surrender is... You know, I think military metaphors are used every day of the week. But I would be cautious, and I think in respect, as I say, in respect, because of the terrible Joe Cox symbolism and the terrible abuse that these people have had, I think it's unwise to not answer it in an extremely sympathetic and understanding way without in any way mitigating the power of your argument.
Finally, Boris Johnson is a huge admirer of your grandfather, Sir Winston Churchill. He wrote a biography of him 5 years ago, which you thought was brilliant. He would probably quite like to emulate your grandfather in certain ways. Are there any similarities between Boris Johnson and Sir Winston Churchill?
Well, not that are immediately obvious, but they both are both governed at a time of great difficulty for this country. And I thought Boris, in his interview, the Prime Minister, in his interview with Andrew Marr yesterday, did make a good point, which he has been elected to lead this country at a very difficult time. And it is a very difficult time, but I think it does behove him to understand that a divided country needs leadership and vision and understanding. And the quicker we can bring it all together, the happier we will all be, and we can get on with doing all the stuff that people really want done in this country.
Thank you very much for
being on the
programme. Thank you.